I want to take a look right now at some of the casino stocks, which are looking rather mixed right now. MGM is actually up. MGM has suffered over the last couple of days because MGM is the one that owns Mandalay Bay, and that is where the shooter operated from, on the 32nd floor. Gregg, Jarrett, one of the things that I think is a little bit odd about this whole thing, and perhaps why MGM might be a little bit nervous about all the lawsuits that could come forward, and of course investors would be nervous as well, is that his hotel room was passed by 3 days in a row, and the do not disturb sign was left there on the door for 3 straight days, but for some reason it didn't raise any eyebrows, nor did his carrying in of all of this weaponry.
Right. A lot of hotels, especially in highly populated areas like this that are very transient, do have stated policies that even if there's a do not disturb sign, within 48 hours, hotel personnel must enter and check on the contents as well as the occupants. Now, I don't particularly know if that's MGM's policy. It could be 72 hours. I just don't know. But in America, anybody can file a lawsuit, however frivolous they may be or without merit. I would expect lawsuits to be filed here based on some of the individuals who were injured, and those who may have been killed. Those would be wrongful death lawsuits by relatives claiming inadequate security and negligence in trying to hold MGM liable for that. That's a tough road. If an occupant of a hotel room secretes the machinery, the weaponry into the hotel, they don't have metal detectors for that. They don't check your bags. That's not standard industry practice. So there's no problem there. And if he was hiding them in a closet unseen by personnel who were checking, then, again, it would be very difficult to prove inadequate security and monitoring.
Yeah, well,
of
it does seem
guests.
a little odd that, the guy is able to keep the do not disturb sign on for 3 straight days and nobody
newlyweds do that all the time.
Adam Johnson joining us here as well, Gregg. And, Adam, I know Jim well, Jim Murren. He's the CEO of MGM. And he has done a pretty remarkable job trying to get that company out of the depths of despair it was in back in 2008 when it really took a nosedive. And its debt situation was a disaster. He's really rebuilt from that.
He has.
And this has got to be a very challenging time. I messaged him actually as this all was unfolding.
What did he tell you?
And he didn't respond. I heard from the PR department who said we'll get back to you shortly. But obviously they're in the thick of this as they're trying to deal with it all. And I would think anyone who runs a company, something this happens under your watch, it has got to be devastating.
Absolutely devastating. And as Craig points out, there's only so much that a hotel can do. And when I first heard about this myself, I thought, my God, how could security people not have noticed, someone coming and going that number of times to bring that number of weapons into a hotel? Because it just seems to defy logic. And, there's also this thing that we cherish here called, freedom in this country, right? And you don't necessarily want security people checking every single person every single time they come in. It's
They do in Israel. You go to a hotel in Israel, and they're gonna make sure you are who you are, and
they do.
And they're looking at you a lot more carefully.
And by the way, that's survival. They have to. Like if you fly a plane out of JFK on El Al, believe me, in fact, if you fly over with a business partner, they will put the two of you in separate rooms and ask you the same question to try to figure out if you have the same age.
It's an interesting. The viewer knows this. My husband's an investment banker, and he's an M&A guy. So he was flying actually recently to Tel Aviv, and sure enough, on El Al, they brought him aside, and the woman who was at the security counter said, well, if Teva Pharmaceuticals wanted to acquire, who would you recommend? In other words, they were pushing him to make sure he was who he was, and he understood the industry he supposedly represented. I mean, this was an important step. We don't do that because our security people, they may not know what M&A is, and they may not know what Teva Pharmaceuticals is, but the security team that they have there, everywhere you go in Israel, is just phenomenal, but certainly at the airports. Let me segue to the markets here a little bit. As we look at a stock market, Adam, that's up 20 points, it's as though nothing can get investors down, right? I mean, despite the fact that we've had horrible natural disasters recently,
right,
a horrible, tragic situation in Las Vegas, which you would think might take a little chunk out of Vegas's profits in the near future, only because people might be a little reticent to travel there. The market, you just can't get this thing down now with the Dow at 22,661.
Well, let me just note that what happened in Las Vegas was one sicko, one deranged sicko. There was no conspiracy that the police have been able to point to, nor that they can prove. And I think that's an important statement that we all have to embrace and recognize. This country is not under threat by something now suddenly because of what happened in Las Vegas. It was a sick, deranged person who did and inflicted horrible things to us.
And that's what investors are doing.
And that's what the market recognizes, Trish. The market, this is not a market story. It's a horrible story. It's a human tragedy that it's the largest gunning down of Americans we've ever seen. And yet, strangely, perversely, I almost hate to say it, it's not a market story. The market story,
because the market
Trish,
is based on the fundamentals, economic fundamentals.
That's the story. It's 10% earnings growth.
I was going to go one further and say taxes too. But there's this optimism, right, about tax reform coming forward. And so earnings are looking good. Economic fundamentals are looking good. We're seeing improvement in jobs, improvement in wages, and hopefully we will see a tax cut for certainly corporate America and individuals as well.